Today, as I promised, we're returning to the book of Acts. We'll pick up right where we left off with Acts 4. Now, in Acts 3, Peter and John had gone to the temple, as apparently they did on a regular basis, every afternoon at 3 o'clock. When they arrived at the beautiful gate, they encountered a lame man. The man asked them for some money, but instead of giving him money, they healed him and restored his mobility. And this caused a stir, because the man, very happy to be healed, began leaping and dancing around and praising God, which drew a crowd. And Peter, seeing the crowd, decided to preach to them, and preach he did. And by the time what he said in that short sermon had hit its mark and sunk into the hearts and minds of those who heard him that day, the church had nearly doubled in size, growing from about 3,000 heads of household to over 5,000. And this despite the fact that Peter was not even allowed to finish his sermon, but was interrupted by the authorities who, noticing the crowd and the commotion, came to Solomon's portico to investigate and find out what was going on. And that's where we pick up now with Acts 4, 1 through 7, where we find the following. The priests and the captain of the temple guard and the Sadducees came up to Peter and John while they were speaking to the people. They were greatly disturbed because the apostles were teaching the people, proclaiming in Jesus the resurrection of the dead. They seized Peter and John, and because it was evening, they put them in jail until the next day. But many who heard the message believed. So the number of men who believed grew to about 5,000. The next day, the rulers, the elders, and the teachers of the law met in Jerusalem. Annas, the high priest, was there, and so were Caiaphas, John, Alexander, and others of the high priest family. They had Peter and John brought before them and began to question them. By what authority? Under whose auspices do you operate? Now, that may sound a little bit different from the way that you remember it, because I've worded the question posed to Peter and John a little differently than it is sometimes rendered. Now, the words recorded here in Acts 7 aren't an exact quote from any one person. They're clearly intended to summarize the gist of what Annas and company had said to Peter and John, but even in summary, words matter. According to Luke's report, the temple authorities want to know something about what Peter and John did in the temple that day. Specifically, they want to know by what dunamis they did it and by what onoma. Now, the word dunamis is the word from which we get the word dynamite, and it means power. But just as in English, the word power in Greek is used in more than one sense. For instance, suppose that you were standing on the sidewalk and you saw some kind of car, a car of some description going down the street, but it was a type of car that you had never seen before and you wanted to know more about it. And you asked your friend, by what power is this vehicle traveling on this road? And if you did, what you would probably be referring to would be the physical means by which that vehicle is being propelled. That is, taking note that this is a horseless carriage. You might wonder if it's powered by an internal combustion engine. And if so, is it a piston engine or a rotary engine? Or is it powered by gasoline or diesel or hydrogen? Or is it an EV? If so, does it run on batteries or fuel cells? Or is it powered by steam or by compressed air? Or is it a pedal car? Is it human powered? Because what you want to know is, by what power is this thingamajig set in motion? And the reason you would default to that kind of thinking is because you are a 21st century American with a thoroughly scientific mindset. But if you were a first century Jew, and more specifically, a first century Jewish scholar, like a priest or a scribe or a Pharisee, that is most likely not what you would be asking if you queried By what power is this vehicle traveling on this road? No, what that person is wondering is not about the mechanical workings of this contraption. What he's wondering about is its license and registration. He wants to know by what authority this whatchamacallit is being allowed to travel on this road. That's the sense of dunamis that he has in mind, the sense of authority. And that's what these high priests were asking Peter and John when they asked them, by what dunamis are you doing what you're doing? They aren't asking by what means, they're asking by what authority. And that's also what's in view with the second question, by what onoma are you doing this? Now, in most translations, the word onoma here is translated name. I've translated it here auspices. By the authority of what name are you doing what you're doing? Now, this is important to understand. When I was writing my doctoral thesis, one of the pieces of advice that my professors kept giving me was that I needed to approach my topic as though I knew nothing about it, and I should assume that my readers know nothing about it also, and that I should present nothing on my own strength or on my own authority or from my own studies or my own personal experience. Instead, I had to search through the writings of other people who were already recognized as established authorities on my topic. And I had to find in their writings things that were similar to what I wanted to propose, and that would in some sense go to or support my proposition. So I would say Robert Jewett, in his commentary on Romans, said such and such about thus and so. And my topic is similar to that in regard to X. Therefore, it may be appropriate to apply Jewett's such and such to my thus and so. And that would be persuasive if my readers knew who Jewett was and were persuaded by his authority to accept my argument. And in my thesis, I did that 1,128 times. Linked them together into a cogent and productive argument. My readers did find it persuasive, and my thesis was successful. Now, after my viva, when my professors were congratulating me, they told me something else then that was very important. They said, okay, now you are the world's leading authority on your topic. Act like it. No one in the world knows more about this question than you do. And now when people are researching Paul's usage of the word charis in 2 Corinthians 8 and 9, they'll be quoting you. And that is not unlike Jewish culture, both then and now when it comes to interpreting Scripture. As you all know, I was recently in Israel. And while there, it was plain to see that, for instance, keeping the Sabbath and doing it properly is a very big deal there culturally. 73% of the citizens in Israel are Jewish, and a preponderance of them are religious Jews. And among the religious Jews, it's universally agreed that the Sabbath must be kept and that no work can be done on the Sabbath. However, just as in Jesus' day, there is no widespread or universally accepted definition of work. People disagree about what constitutes work and what doesn't. And they even disagree on what criterion should be used to decide what's work and what isn't. For some Jews, as long as they don't themselves work, they figure I'm not sinning. But for other Jews, they are persuaded that if they do even anything that causes work to be done, they're sinning. For some Jews, for instance, if they get into an elevator to go to another floor of a building, that isn't work. They're just standing still. But for other Jews, the fact that pushing the floor button causes work to be done makes them guilty of sin. because by their actions, work was caused. So in all the hotels that we stayed in, for my full 10 days there in Israel, there was always one elevator that was dedicated as a Sabbath elevator. And on that elevator, there was a sign that says, on the Sabbath, this elevator will run constantly on its own and will stop on every floor. You don't have to push a button. You can get in and ride it with a clean conscience because riding it didn't cause work. The elevator itself may still be sinning, who knows? But I'm not contributing to its sin by riding it because it'd be going up and down whether I were riding it or not. And that, it seemed, is a settled matter. But not everything is. While I was there, I read a newspaper article about whether or not it was okay to flush the toilet on the Sabbath. Because while it's permissible to flush the toilet under the principle of kavod habriot, a Talmudic principle safeguarding human dignity, not everyone agrees that it's okay to flush the toilet on the Sabbath if the toilet is fitted with a dispenser that cleans the toilet when it's flushed. Because by so doing, you may be causing work to be done. And that's what the article was about. Is it okay or isn't it? And in the article, the author quoted 2 or 3 rabbis who said it was okay, and he quoted 2 or 3 who said it wasn't. And then he said it was up to the reader to decide. And how was it that the reader should decide such a thing? Well, on the authority of the rabbi who made the best argument. Because if you're a follower of Rabbi Smith, you'll agree with his opinion. And if you're a follower of Rabbi Jones, you'll agree with his. And that's what's at the heart of what the high priests in Acts 4 are asking Peter and John. In whose name are you teaching in the temple? Who is your rabbi? Who is your teacher? And not just to ask, why should anyone listen to you, but to ask, what gives you the right to teach in the temple in the first place? What is your pedigree? From whom did you get your degree in theology? Because you see, in first century Palestine, there were hundreds of rabbis, all with classes of students. Now, they were small, private schools of religion. And there was not a central accrediting agency. No, these schools were known by reputation, and their accreditation was on the authority of the rabbi. Paul, for instance, when he was a young man, was a student of Gamaliel. And Gamaliel's school of theology was, so to speak, the Harvard of Israel. And when Paul graduated from Gamaliel's school, he would have been free, as a rabbi now himself, to start his own school and have his own students. And rabbis all over the region were graduating students all the time on an ongoing basis. And as such, there were new rabbis springing up all the time, each with their own coterie of students. But generally speaking, no rabbi would ever allow even the best of his students to speak in public, much less in the temple, unsupervised, on his own. No, the rabbi would be there to hear what the student had to say and to ask questions of the student and to challenge him and argue with him and teach him how to teach others and to teach him how to speak with authority. And what the high priests were asking of Peter and John was, where is your supervisor? Where's your rabbi? Under what rabbi are you studying? Now, why would the high priest ask Peter such a question? As I said, there were hundreds of rabbis across the region, all with their own schools, and no one could possibly know them all. The new ones were springing up all the time. as newly graduated rabbis matriculated from their schools and started their own schools. Why did the high priest assume that Peter was not one of them? Why didn't he ask him, "What's your name?" rather than, "What's your rabbi's name?" Why did he assume that Peter was a student and not a rabbi himself? Well, I think that the reason for that, or at least one of the reasons for that, was because Peter and John were too young to be rabbis. You see, in Jewish culture in the first century, there was a way of doing things in the educational system, and people in that culture knew the way, just like people in our culture know how our education system works. We know that pre-K starts at age 4, kindergarten at 5, first grade at 6, middle school at 11, high school at 14, and that generally speaking, people graduate when they're 17 or 18. Well, in Jewish culture in first century Palestine, scripture study started at age 5. Mishnah study at age 10. And Torah obligations kicked in at age 13. But only the most promising students would then go on to rabbinical studies. But if you were chosen by a rabbi who would call you to follow him, you would begin following him, generally speaking, around the age of 15. He would be your formal religious teacher then for the next 15 years. And you, along with your classmates, usually 10 or 15 or so of you, would follow your rabbi together, spending lots of time together, sometimes even living together. And then at the age of 30, you would graduate. And if you so chose, you could become a rabbi and start your own school and have your own students whom you would call to follow you. And many Bible scholars think that that's what Jesus was doing when he called the 12 apostles to follow him. After all, according to Luke 3:23, when Jesus began to teach, he was about 30 years old. And it only makes sense that the apostles whom he called to follow him were younger than he when he called them. And frankly, I think they probably were. And the reason for that is because there is some biblical and historical evidence that they were all younger than him. And there's no evidence that I know of to suggest that any of them were older than him. For instance, there's broad scholarly consensus that the Apostle John died in 99 AD at the age of 88, and that he was born in 11 AD. Well, we know within a very small margin of error when Jesus was born. He was born in 2 BC, probably in June. Indeed, the information we have would seem to indicate that Jesus was born on June 17, 2 BC, and that he was worshipped by the wise men 6 months later on December 25, 2 BC. So if the information we have about John is correct, then John would have been 13 years younger than Jesus. So when Jesus was 30, John would have been about 17. And it seems pretty certain that John was not yet 20 years old when the event recorded for us in Matthew 17, 24 through 27 occurred. Because there we find the following. After Jesus and his disciples had arrived in Capernaum, the collectors of the 2 drachma temple tax came to Peter and asked, "Doesn't your rabbi pay the didrachma?" "Yes, he does," he replied. When Peter came into the house, Jesus was the first to speak. "What do you think, Simon?" he asked. "From whom do the kings of the earth collect duty and taxes? From their own children or from others?" "Well, from others," Peter answered. "Then the children are exempt," Jesus said to him. "But so that we may not cause offense, Go to the lake and throw out your line. Take the first fish you catch and open its mouth, and you'll find a stater. Take it and give it to them for my tax and yours. Now, first, you'll notice that in this translation, the temple tax collectors refer to Jesus as Peter's rabbi. Now, to be sure, the Greek word that I've translated rabbi here is the word didaskalos, which is usually translated into English as teacher. But in John 1:38, John tells us that the word didaskalos is the Greek translation of the Hebrew word rabbi. And Jesus turned and saw them following him and asked, "What do you want?" They answered him, "Rabbi," which translated means teacher, "where are you staying?" Which is why I, along with a few other translators, have translated this word as rabbi in Matthew 17:24, because according to the Bible, that's what it means, specifically when it's used in reference to Jesus. Second, it's important to point out that a didrachm or didrachma is a 2 drachma coin. It was a Roman coin that at that time was equal in value to a half a shekel or 1 beka, which is the amount set in Exodus 30:13 for the temple tax. Each one who is numbered in the census shall give this, half a shekel according to the shekel of the sanctuary. The shekel is 20 gerahs, half a shekel as an offering to the Lord. And a stater was a Roman coin, also known as a tetradrachm, which was equal to 1 shekel. Now, I realize that may be a little confusing. It's no more confusing than the way we talk about money. After all, if you're my age or older, then you know that a fin is a $5 bill, sawbuck is a $10 bill, a dub or a Jackson a $20 bill, half yard or a grant is a 50, a C note or a Benjamin is 100. But the point is that a didrachm is exact change to pay the temple tax for 1 person, and a stater is exact change to pay the temple tax for 2 people. And that begs the question, why is it that Jesus goes to the trouble to perform a miracle to pay the temple tax in order to appease his critics if he's going to pay the tax for 2 people only? Why isn't he having the fish cough up 26 drachmas so Peter can pay the temple tax for all 12 apostles and Jesus? Well, the answer, I think, is in Exodus 30:13 through 15. Each one who is numbered in the census shall give this, half a shekel according to the shekel of the sanctuary. The shekel is 20 gerahs, half a shekel as an offering to the Lord. Everyone who is numbered in the census from 20 years old and upward shall give the Lord's offering. The rich shall not give more, the poor shall not give less than the half shekel when you give the Lord's offering. According to this passage, the temple tax was to be paid by all of those who were counted in the census, and only by those who were counted in the census. And those who were counted in the census were all the males who were 20 years old or older. Those who were under 20 did not have to pay. So if Jesus is doing what he says he's doing in Matthew 17:24 through 27, which is satisfying the law in order to keep from being a distraction to his critics, then it stands to reason that he needed only 2 levies to accomplish the task. And why would that be? Well, one explanation, and I think the most obvious explanation, is that he needed money for only 2 levies because only 2 people owed the tax. The 2 who were over the age of 20, Jesus and Peter. All the other apostles were under 20 years of age. Indeed, it seems likely that they were actually under 18 years of age, because the normal marrying age for Jewish males In 33 AD, he was 18. Now, we don't know if Jesus was married. He might have been. There's no reason why he couldn't have been. But most Bible scholars think that Jesus was single and that he never married. But Peter married. According to Matthew 8, 14 through 15, Mark 1, 30 through 31, and 1 Corinthians 9, 5, Peter was married. And according to 1 Peter 5, 13, Peter and his wife had at least one son, Marcus. So it would appear that Peter was the oldest of the 12 apostles. Maybe that's why, or at least one of the reasons why Jesus chose Peter to feed his lambs after he was gone. He was the oldest. The others would follow him. But as far as we know, none of the other 12 apostles was married when they were called by Jesus. James, the brother of the Lord, it appears, was married, but he was not among the original 12. And none of the 12 had yet reached the age of 20 when Jesus moved his school to Capernaum in Matthew 17. Though it does seem likely that they were at least 15 years of age when they were called, because 15 was the age at which young men would start their trades. And we know that the apostles, at least the fishermen among them, had started their trades when Jesus called them to follow him. Now, on this note, there is one possible outlier, and that's Matthew, because Matthew was working at a toll booth when Jesus called him. Now, it could be that this was his family's trade, which trade he began plying when he was 15, just as the fishermen had begun fishing when they were 15. I don't know for sure. And I don't want to be guilty of special pleading, but it does seem consistent with Roman policy for them to allow their local employment practices to be carried out in accordance with local custom. In any case, leaving this question about Matthew unanswered seems a small matter in comparison to the questions that this take on the apostles answers. For instance, if the apostles were young, if the apostles were teenagers, then this explains why they were all available to follow Jesus when he called them. It also explains why they were emotionally available for Jesus and for each other. Why they bonded with Jesus and with each other so quickly. Why it seemed natural and appropriate for Jesus to be as affectionate with them as he was. It provides a cogent context for understanding why Jesus spoke to the apostles the way that he did, referring to them as little children, as lambs, as he does in John 13:33 and John 21:4 and Luke 10:21 through 22 and Matthew 11:25 and John 21:15. If you accept that the apostles were quite young when Jesus called them, it helps to explain why they accepted the nicknames that they were given. In Greek, James the Less is Jacobus the Micron, which naturally translates as Little James. And Jude had two nicknames, Thaddeus, which means child of the breast, and Labius, which translates roughly as mama's boy. He was probably the youngest of the apostles. And these nicknames and the probable accompanying teasing that came with them, those make sense if you've ever spent much time around teenage boys. And if the apostles were teenagers, it certainly helps to explain some of their behavior. And here I have to confess that over the years, I've been pretty harsh on some of the apostles for some of the things that they do. In particular, I've had a hard time appreciating Peter and his inconsistencies and impetuousness. One minute making his great confession of faith in Jesus, and the very next minute saying, "May it never be, Lord." One minute saying, "You shall never wash my feet," and the very next minute saying, "Well, Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head." And I've been harsh on James and John for things like the incident recorded in Luke 9, 51 through 56. When the days drew near for him to be taken up, he set his face to go to Jerusalem, and he sent messengers ahead of him who went and entered a village of the Samaritans to make preparations for him. But the people did not receive him because his face was set toward Jerusalem. And when his disciples, James and John, saw it, they said, "Lord, do you want us to tell fire to come down from heaven and consume them?" But he turned and rebuked them. They went to another village. Several times I've read that and thought to myself, well, what ridiculous behavior for grown men. Why don't they act their age? When I realized that James and John were probably teenagers at the time, I thought, oh, well, maybe they are acting their age. And understanding this has certainly helped me to make more sense of what's recorded for us in Matthew 20 through 22. Then the mother of the sons of Zebedee came up to him with her sons, and kneeling before him, she asked him for something. And he said to her, "What do you want?" She said to him, "Say that these two sons of mine are to sit, one at your right hand and one at your left in your kingdom." Jesus answered, "Do you not know what you are asking? Are you able to drink the cup that I'm to drink?" They said to him, "We are able." He said to them, "You will drink my cup, but to sit at my right hand and my left hand is not mine to grant, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared by my Father." And when the other 10 heard it, they were indignant with the two brothers. You see, in just about every depiction I've ever seen about Jesus and the apostles are portrayed as mature men who don't just look every bit as old as Jesus, but who tend to actually look older than him. And I've often thought to myself that this is a bad look for men who are 35 or 40 years old. I mean, can you imagine being 38 years old and sending your mother to your boss at work to ask him for a promotion for you? But it makes more sense if you're 18 and you've got a stage mom who's watching from the wings and who doesn't think that the director is giving her precious lambs the roles that they deserve because she's something of a narcissist and she thinks this story is about her and her offspring. And you haven't quite developed the spine yet to tell her to knock it off. I mean, that doesn't get James and John entirely off the hook, but it does cast them in a better light. And better light is a pretty good thing, especially when you place it on a lampstand and allow it to light the whole room. Because it does more than illuminate the darkest corners. It also brings to light things that have been hidden under a bushel. And that brings us back to Acts 4, where Peter and John are being questioned by the council of the high priest. And they ask Peter, "By what authority? Under whose auspices do you operate?" And Peter knows exactly what they mean by that question. He knows. He understands that what they're asking him is, who do you kids think you are? Where's your rabbi? We'd like to speak to him, see if he can get you two under control. You got to love youth, because the same disposition that at other times has gotten Peter into trouble also tends to make him fearless. So when they ask him about his rabbi, he doesn't flinch. He says, "Oh, you mean that man that you killed? Let me tell you about him." Picking back up with Acts 4, 8 through 12. Then Peter, filled with the Holy Spirit, said to them, rulers of the people and elders, if we're being examined today concerning a good deed done to a crippled man, by what means this man has been healed. Let it be known to all of you and to all the people of Israel that by the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, whom you crucified, whom God raised from the dead, by him, this man is standing before you well. This Jesus is the stone that was rejected by you, the builders, which has become the cornerstone. And there is salvation in no one else. For there is no name under heaven given among men by which we must be saved. And that, my friends, is Peter acting his age at its best. But it gets even better. Because the punchline of this story comes in verse 13 of Acts 4. And this punchline is a real doozy. It's a real sockdologer. It's actually kind of amusing. Kind of makes me chuckle just thinking about it right now. Unfortunately, we're out of time. So you'll have to wait for that punchline till next week. In the meantime, take this gem with you. Act your age. It worked for the apostles. Maybe it'll work for you too. That's my lesson for today. I'm going to be leading us in our closing prayer here in just a moment. Got a letter a couple weeks ago from a brave sister in Christ who lives in Colorado Springs. I don't know how many churches she sent this to, but I'm guessing quite a few. It says, "Hello, my name is Beth Fasten. I've been a member of our Lord's Church since the mid-'60s. I'm writing you today to solicit prayers on behalf of our world. Over the past several years, we seem to have become an angry and hateful society across all nations, at odds with everyone over everything, polarized on many fronts. This concerns me. I hope it concerns you too. In 2 Chronicles 7:14, the Lord says that if his people humble themselves and pray and seek his face and turn from their wicked ways, he will hear from heaven. He will forgive their sins and heal their land. In John 14:13 through 14, Jesus says, whatever you ask in my name, that I will do, that the Father may be glorified in the Son. If you ask me anything in my name, I will do it. And once again in John 15:7, if you abide in me and my words abide in you, ask whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. Our world needs healing, plain and simple. Those of us with some age on us have seen many instances where all we can do is shake our heads and say a quick prayer, acknowledging that the Lord is in control because we simply do not and cannot understand what's happening in front of us. It's as though we're witnessing a train wreck about to happen and we're powerless to stop it. Yet we know the result will be disastrous. Matthew 12:25 reminds us, any kingdom divided against itself is laid waste, and any city or house divided against itself shall not stand. And we are divided. My soul is vexed. With the world seemingly upside down, we are in need of healing. So my request today is for every member of every church to agree to lift our voices in prayer as one mighty appeal to our Lord to heal our land. Hebrews 4:16 reminds us, therefore draw near with confidence to the throne of grace that we may receive mercy and may find grace to help in time of need. And James 5:16 says, the effective prayer of a righteous man can accomplish much. on August 6, 2023, I'm asking for a public prayer in the worship service to be a sincere petition for the healing of our world. One day, one prayer. As his body and his called out, I feel we owe it to ourselves, our children, and our world to fervently ask for his healing of our land and our world. To get us back on track, please join forces with me as we make our petition known to God, asking him to forgive us where we have strayed from his word and to humble our hearts to hear his instruction so he will heal our land. Only he can accomplish this task. In his name and with heartfelt sincerity, Beth Fasten. It's a privilege to pray for the saints when they ask for prayers. Let's pray. Gracious Lord, we stand with all those who are standing today to approach your throne and to ask for healing for our land. To this end, Lord, we humble ourselves before you. We confess our sins. We repent, and we ask for your blessings. Lord, we don't ask for a return to normalcy. We don't even know what that is. What we do ask for is for things to be well, for there to be no unnecessary strife, for there to be greater domestic bliss, less senseless division, less foolishness in politics, less foolishness in education, less foolishness in our courts and in law enforcement, less foolishness in our churches, less foolishness on our TV screens, less foolishness in our hearts. Hear our prayer, Lord, and grant us your peace. In Jesus' name, amen.